Good evening, dear listener. Tonight, let us journey together into the distant past, to a time when the world moved at a different rhythm, a slower, more deliberate pace. As you settle comfortably into your bed, allow your breathing to naturally slow and deepen. We're going to explore the life of medieval peasants, those forgotten souls who made up nearly 90% of Europe's population for centuries. Close your eyes if you haven't already, and let your mind drift backward through time, past the Industrial Revolution, past the Renaissance, beyond the printing press and gunpowder, back to an age when the vast majority of people lived lives that were, in many ways, far more challenging than we might imagine from our comfortable modern perspective. Tonight's story isn't one of knights in shining armor or grand castles, though those existed, of course. Instead, we'll gently explore the daily reality of the common people, the farmers and laborers whose lives were bound to the soil, to the seasons, and to a social system that would seem almost unimaginably restrictive to us today. Let yourself sink deeper into relaxation as we begin this peaceful journey into history. Imagine, if you will, awakening not to an alarm clock, but to the gentle crowing of a rooster in the pre-dawn darkness of a medieval village. The year is 1347, and you are a peasant serf in the English countryside. Your eyes open slowly in the single room you share with your entire family, your spouse, your 3 children, your elderly mother, and perhaps a pig or two that provide warmth during the coldest nights. The walls around you are made of wattle and daub, thin wooden strips woven together and covered with a mixture of mud, clay, and straw. The roof above is thatched with bundled reeds that need constant repair, especially after the fierce storms that seem to come more frequently each year. There are no glass windows in your humble dwelling, only small openings covered with oiled cloth or wooden shutters that barely keep out the perpetual dampness. Let your breathing continue to slow as we explore this world together. The floor beneath you is nothing more than packed earth, sometimes covered with rushes or straw that grows damp and musty from the moisture that seeps up from the ground below. In the corner stands your most valuable possession, a wooden chest containing your few changes of clothing, perhaps a small knife, and if you're fortunate, a piece of silver saved from better harvests. As you lie there in those quiet moments before dawn, you can hear the sounds of your village slowly awakening, the soft lowing of cattle in the distance, the creaking of wooden cartwheels on the muddy path outside, and the hushed voices of your neighbors preparing for another day of endless labor. The air carries the mingled scents of wood smoke, animal dung, and the earthy dampness that seems to permeate everything in this medieval world. Your stomach aches with the familiar pang of hunger. Not the sharp, immediate hunger we might feel when we've missed a meal, but the constant gnawing emptiness that has been your companion for months now. The last harvest was poor, and the winter stores are running dangerously low. You know that spring is still weeks away, and with it, the hope of fresh growth and perhaps, if God wills it, enough food to fill your belly properly for the first time in memory. But let us not dwell on discomfort. Instead, allow yourself to observe this world with the gentle curiosity of a historian, watching from a place of safety and warmth. Consider how these people found moments of peace and beauty even in their hardship. The way morning mist might drift across the fields like a soft silver blanket, or how the first songbirds of spring could lift spirits that had been dampened by months of cold and scarcity. Rising from your straw mattress, you reach for your clothes in the dim light filtering through the single window opening. Your garments are simple, a long woolen tunic that reaches to your knees, woolen hose that tie at the waist, and sturdy leather shoes that have been patched and repatched countless times. The fabric is coarse and scratchy against your skin, dyed in muted browns and greys from local plants and clay. Bright colors are for the wealthy. For you, practical durability matters more than beauty. Your day begins before sunrise, as it always has and always will. The rhythm of peasant life follows the sun and the seasons with a precision that our modern world has almost forgotten. There is no artificial light to extend the working day, no electric bulbs or gas lamps to push back the darkness. When the sun sets, your world shrinks to the small circle of light cast by a single tallow candle or oil lamp, if you can afford such luxuries. Step outside with me now into the cool morning air of your medieval village. The ground beneath your feet is a mixture of packed earth and mud, churned by countless footsteps, cartwheels, and the hooves of livestock. During the rainy season, this becomes a treacherous bog that can swallow a shoe or trap a cartwheel. In summer, it bakes hard as stone, creating ruts and furrows that make walking an exercise in careful balance. Your village stretches along a single muddy road with perhaps 30 or 40 other peasant dwellings scattered on either side. Each house is much like your own, small, dark, and cramped. Some are slightly larger, belonging to the more prosperous villagers, the miller perhaps, or the blacksmith who serves several surrounding communities. But even these wealthy peasants live in conditions that would seem primitive beyond imagination to modern eyes. As you walk through your village in these quiet morning moments, breathe deeply and imagine the scents that fill the air. The sweet smell of hay from the communal barn, where the precious draft animals are kept. The sharp tang of wood smoke rising from cooking fires that are already being kindled for the day's meals. The earthy richness of the vegetable gardens, where families grow cabbages, onions, and beans, if they're fortunate enough to have a small plot of their own. Let your mind drift as we consider the social structure that governs this peasant's life. You are what is known as a serf, bound to the land and to your lord by bonds that are almost impossible to break. This is not slavery in the sense we might understand it. You cannot be bought and sold like property, but neither are you free to leave, to choose your occupation, or to marry without permission from your lord. The manor system that controls your existence is both your prison and your protection. Your lord, perhaps a knight who holds his lands from a higher noble, who in turn serves the king, provides you with a small plot of land to work for your own sustenance. In return, you owe him labor on his domain lands for several days each week, plus a portion of your own harvest, and various other fees and obligations that seem to multiply with each passing year. Gently consider how this system shapes every aspect of daily life. When your lord decides to plant his fields with barley instead of wheat, you must provide the labor to make it happen, regardless of your own needs or preferences. When he requires repairs to his manor house or the construction of new barns, you and your neighbors must set aside your own work to serve his needs first. The concept of personal choice, so fundamental to our modern understanding of human dignity, simply doesn't exist in your medieval world. Your occupation, your residence, your marriage partner, even the clothes you wear, all are subject to the approval or disapproval of your social superiors. Yet within these constraints, people found ways to create meaning, community, and even moments of joy. As the sun climbs higher, casting longer shadows across your village, you make your way to the common fields where much of your labor will be spent. These fields are divided into long, narrow strips, each family working their allocated portions in a system that has remained unchanged for generations. The sight is both beautiful and melancholy. Rows of green shoots stretching toward the horizon, tended by bent figures who move with the slow, steady rhythm of those who know that haste serves no purpose. Your tools are simple but effective, crafted by local artisans from materials that can be found or traded within a few miles of your village. A wooden plow tipped with iron, if you're fortunate enough to afford such metal. A scythe for harvesting grain, its curved blade honed to razor sharpness through countless hours of careful maintenance. Wooden rakes and hoes, their smooth handles worn to perfect fit by generations of calloused hands. Let yourself imagine the weight of these tools in your hands, the satisfying resistance of earth as the plough blade cuts through soil that has been cultivated for centuries. There's a meditative quality to this repetitive work, the steady pace of walking behind the ox or horse, the rhythmic swing of the scythe through ripened grain, the careful placement of seeds in furrows that represent hope for the future. But this agricultural work, peaceful as it might seem to our modern eyes, carries with it constant anxiety about survival. A late frost could destroy tender shoots overnight. Too much rain could rot the grain before harvest. Too little rain could leave the fields brown and barren. Insects, plant diseases, and countless other natural disasters lurk as constant threats to the thin margin that separates your family from starvation. The spectre of famine haunts medieval life in ways that are difficult for us to comprehend. Not the temporary food shortage that might mean eating rice and beans for a week while waiting for payday, but the kind of desperate hunger that drives people to eat bark, roots, and things that barely qualify as food. Historical records speak quietly of years when entire regions lost a third or more of their population to starvation and the diseases that follow in its wake. Yet let us not focus too intently on these darker aspects. Instead, allow your mind to drift toward the small pleasures that brightened even the most difficult lives. The satisfaction of bringing in a good harvest when the granary is full and there will be bread through the winter. The warmth of fellowship during the long evening hours when families and neighbors gather to share stories, songs, and the simple comfort of human companionship. Religious festivals provided breaks in the monotony of agricultural labor. Feast days when work was forbidden and the community came together in celebration. Easter, with its promise of renewal and resurrection. Midsummer festivals that celebrated the longest day and the abundance of the growing season. Harvest festivals that gave thanks for whatever bounty the year had provided, no matter how meager it might seem. On these special days, even the poorest peasants might taste white bread instead of the dark, coarse loaves that formed their usual diet. There might be ale or wine, music and dancing, games and contests that brought laughter to faces often worn down by unrelenting toil. Children played with simple toys carved from wood or scraps of cloth, their imaginations transforming the humblest materials into sources of wonder and delight. Marriage in the peasant world was both a practical necessity and, when fortune smiled, a source of genuine affection and partnership. Young people rarely married for romantic love in the modern sense, but rather for the practical advantages of combining resources, sharing labor, and ensuring survival through mutual support. Yet within these pragmatic arrangements, deep bonds of care and commitment often grew, strengthened by shared hardship and the intimate knowledge that comes from working side by side through all of life's challenges. Let your breathing deepen as we explore the daily rhythm of meals in this medieval world. Breakfast, if it exists at all, might be nothing more than a piece of stale bread soaked in weak ale or watery porridge made from whatever grains are available. The main meal of the day comes in the late morning or early afternoon when the heaviest work is done and people can gather briefly to share whatever food the family can provide. This meal typically consists of a thick stew or pottage, a mixture of grains, vegetables, and occasionally small amounts of meat or fat that has been simmered slowly over the cooking fire. The ingredients change with the seasons and the family's fortune, but the basic concept remains constant, a hearty, filling dish that provides energy for the afternoon's labor while making the most of whatever ingredients are available. Bread, when it can be afforded, is dark and dense, made from whatever grains can be grown or purchased. Wheat makes the finest bread, but it's expensive and often beyond the reach of peasant families. More common are loaves made from rye, barley, oats, or mixtures of different grains. In times of scarcity, bread might be stretched with ground acorns, peas, or other less desirable ingredients that add bulk if not flavor. Vegetables from the family garden provide important variety and nutrition. Onions, cabbages, carrots, beans, and peas that can be eaten fresh in season or preserved through winter in various ways. Herbs grown near the kitchen door add flavor to otherwise monotonous meals, while also serving as medicine for common ailments. A small apple tree or berry bushes might provide precious fruit, either eaten fresh or dried for winter storage. Meat is a luxury reserved for special occasions or times of particular prosperity. A pig might be slaughtered before winter, providing ham, bacon, and sausages that must last for months. Chickens provide eggs more valuable than their meat, though an old hen past laying might eventually find her way into the stew pot. Fish from nearby streams or ponds supplement the diet when available, caught with simple nets or hooks crafted by local artisans. Dairy products, when available, come from the family's cow or goats, animals that serve multiple purposes as sources of milk, cheese, leather, and eventually meat. But keeping livestock requires resources that many peasant families simply cannot afford. Pasture land, winter feed, and the initial cost of purchasing healthy animals. Many families share ownership of a cow or pig with their neighbors, dividing both the costs and the benefits of animal husbandry. The preservation of food for winter storage requires considerable skill and effort. Meat must be salted, smoked, or dried to prevent spoilage. Vegetables are pickled in vinegar or buried in root cellars, where the cool, stable temperature slows deterioration. Grains must be kept dry and protected from rats, mice, and insects that can destroy months of careful work in a matter of weeks. Let your mind wander now to the craftspeople who serve your medieval village, the miller who grinds grain into flour, taking his payment in kind from each customer's sack. The blacksmith whose forge glows red hot as he shapes iron into tools, horseshoes, and the countless metal objects that make agricultural life possible. The carpenter who builds and repairs the wooden structures that shelter both people and animals from the elements. These artisans occupy a slightly higher social position than ordinary field laborers, but their lives are still bounded by the same constraints of the manor system. They too owe labor and payments to their lord, and they too must navigate the complex web of obligations and relationships that govern medieval society. Yet their specialized skills provide a measure of security and respect that pure agricultural work cannot match. The village priest represents another world entirely, a man of learning in a society where literacy is rare and precious. He conducts the religious services that punctuate the rhythm of rural life, marking births, marriages, and deaths with ceremonies that connect earthly existence to eternal mysteries. His small church, with its stone walls and wooden roof, stands as the most substantial building in the village, a testament to the central role of faith in medieval life. But even the priest, despite his education and spiritual authority, lives a life that would seem harsh by modern standards. His dwelling is only slightly larger and more comfortable than those of his parishioners. He tends his own garden and livestock, performs much of his own manual labor, and shares in the general hardships that affect the entire community during times of scarcity or natural disaster. The seasonal rhythm of medieval life creates a natural meditation on the passage of time and the cycles of growth, harvest, death, and renewal. Spring brings the anxious hope of new growth, the careful preparation of fields, and the planting of seeds that represent the year's entire food supply. Summer means long days of cultivation, weeding, and the constant battle against pests and diseases that threaten the growing crops. Autumn harvest time is both celebration and anxiety. Celebration for whatever bounty the year has provided, anxiety about whether it will be sufficient to last through the long winter months ahead. This is the time when the community comes together most visibly, with families helping each other bring in their crops and sharing in the massive task of threshing grain and preparing it for storage. Winter brings a different rhythm. shorter days when much of the work must be done by firelight or candlelight if such luxuries are available. This is the season for indoor crafts, for mending tools and clothing, for telling stories that preserve the community's history and values. It's also the time when food stores dwindle and families count every grain, every preserved vegetable, wondering if their careful calculations will prove sufficient. Let yourself imagine the long winter evenings in a medieval peasant household, the single room lit by the flickering flames of the central hearth. Family members gathered close for warmth and companionship. The eldest members of the family share memories of previous years, comparing this winter's hardships to those of seasons past. Children listen with wide eyes to stories of saints and heroes, of local legends and family history that stretches back generations. Women spend these evening hours spinning wool into thread, a task that requires skill and patience, but can be performed while sitting by the fire. The steady rhythm of the spinning wheel becomes a kind of meditation, the thin strand growing longer with each turn, eventually becoming the yarn that will be woven into cloth for family clothing. This is valuable work. Textiles are expensive, and the ability to produce cloth at home represents significant savings for families operating on the margins of survival. Men might spend winter evenings carving wooden tools or utensils, sharpening metal implements on whetstones, or planning improvements to the house or farm that can be undertaken when spring returns. Every scrap of wood, every piece of metal, every fragment of leather is precious and must be used efficiently. Nothing is wasted in a world where waste might mean the difference between survival and starvation. The sounds of a medieval winter evening are both peaceful and haunting. The crackling of logs in the fireplace, the whisper of wind through the thatch overhead, the soft murmur of voices sharing the day's experiences or planning tomorrow's tasks. Outside, the village sleeps under whatever blanket of snow or frost the season has provided, the houses marked by thin trails of smoke rising from their chimneys into the star-filled sky. Medical care in this medieval world depends primarily on folk remedies passed down through generations of trial and error. The village wise woman might know which herbs can ease pain, reduce fever, or help heal wounds. She understands the properties of willow bark for headaches, chamomile for stomach ailments, and dozens of other plant-based treatments that form the foundation of peasant medicine. But serious injuries or diseases often prove fatal simply because effective treatment doesn't exist. A broken bone that fails to heal properly can end a person's ability to perform physical labor, which in turn threatens the survival of the entire family. Infections that would be easily treated with modern antibiotics can spread and kill. Childhood diseases claim many young lives, creating a world where parents learn not to become too attached to their children until they've survived their most vulnerable years. Childbirth represents both hope and terror for medieval women. Large families are necessary for survival. Children provide labor, care for aging parents, and represent the only form of social security available. But pregnancy and delivery carry enormous risks in a world without modern medical knowledge or sterile conditions. Many women die in childbirth, and infant mortality rates that would shock modern sensibilities are simply accepted as part of God's plan. Yet within these harsh realities, medieval people found ways to celebrate life and create beauty. They developed songs and stories that expressed their hopes and fears. They crafted objects of simple but genuine artistry, carved wooden bowls, embroidered clothing, illuminated religious texts that combined faith with aesthetic expression. They created communities bound together by mutual dependence and shared experience. The legal system that governs peasant life operates according to principles that seem strange to modern eyes. Justice is administered by the lord of the manor or his appointed officials, following customs that have evolved over centuries rather than written laws. Disputes over property, debts, or personal conflicts are resolved in manor courts, where the entire community serves as witness to the proceedings. Punishments for crimes tend toward public humiliation rather than imprisonment. Stocks placed in the village square, where offenders are exposed to the ridicule and abuse of their neighbors. For more serious crimes, physical punishment is common. Whipping, branding, or in extreme cases, execution. But the most feared punishment of all is banishment from the community, which amounts to a death sentence in a world where survival depends on belonging to a recognized social group. The concept of privacy, so important to modern life, simply doesn't exist in the medieval peasant world. Families live in single rooms where every aspect of life, sleeping, eating, working, arguing, loving, takes place in the presence of parents, children, and often extended family members. Neighbors are intimately familiar with each other's business, both by necessity and by choice. Secrets are difficult to keep in a community where everyone depends on everyone else for survival. This lack of privacy extends to personal hygiene and bodily functions as well. Bathing is infrequent and often communal when it occurs at all. Toilet facilities consist of simple pits or designated areas outside the house, shared by multiple families. The modern expectation of cleanliness and personal grooming would seem not just impossible, but pointless to people whose daily lives involve intimate contact with soil, animals, and the various substances necessary for agricultural work. Yet cleanliness is not entirely ignored. People wash their hands and faces regularly, clean their teeth with twigs or rough cloths, and make efforts to keep their clothing as clean as possible given the limitations of medieval washing techniques. They understand the connection between filth and disease, even if they lack the scientific knowledge to explain it. They develop customs and practices that serve hygiene goals, even when the underlying reasoning is lost to folk tradition. Religious observance provides structure and meaning to medieval peasant life in ways that extend far beyond modern concepts of weekly church attendance. The calendar is organized around religious festivals and holy days that mark the passage of time and create rhythm in lives that might otherwise blur together in monotonous labor. These celebrations provide not just spiritual comfort, but also social cohesion and psychological relief from the hardships of daily existence. The church building itself serves as community center, meeting hall, and refuge in times of danger. Its stone walls and solid construction make it the most durable structure in most villages, capable of providing shelter when wooden houses catch fire or when raiders threaten the area. The cemetery surrounding the church connects the living community with generations of ancestors, creating a sense of continuity that transcends individual mortality. Prayer becomes a natural part of daily routine, not just formal recitations at specified times, but a constant conversation with divine powers who might influence the success of crops, the health of livestock, and the safety of family members. This isn't necessarily sophisticated theology. For many peasants, Christianity blends easily with older folk beliefs and superstitions that address the same fundamental need to feel connected to forces beyond human control. The illiteracy that characterizes most medieval peasants shouldn't be viewed as ignorance or lack of intelligence. These people possess vast stores of practical knowledge about agriculture, weather patterns, animal behavior, herbal medicine, and countless other subjects essential for survival. They carry in their memories the accumulated wisdom of centuries, passed down through oral tradition with remarkable accuracy and detail. They can predict weather changes by observing cloud formations, animal behavior, and subtle environmental cues that escape the notice of less experienced observers. They understand soil conditions, drainage patterns, and the complex relationships between different plants and crops. They know which trees produce the best timber for different purposes, which stones make the most durable building materials, and how to work with natural materials in ways that modern technology has largely forgotten. This practical intelligence extends to social and psychological insights as well. Living in close proximity with the same people for entire lifetimes creates deep understanding of human nature, personality types, and the dynamics of community relationships. Medieval peasants developed sophisticated strategies for conflict resolution, resource sharing, and group decision-making that allow their communities to function effectively despite the absence of formal governmental structures. The institution of marriage in peasant society serves multiple functions beyond the romantic partnership emphasized in modern culture. It creates economic partnerships where husband and wife combine their labor, resources, and skills to maximize their family's chances of survival. It establishes social connections between different families, creating networks of mutual obligation and support that extend throughout the community. Wedding celebrations, when resources permit, bring together the entire village in festivities that reinforce community bonds while marking the transition of young people into full adult responsibility. These events are carefully planned to make the most of limited resources. Food contributed by many families, music provided by whoever possesses the necessary skills, and entertainment that relies on participation rather than passive consumption. The division of labor between men and women follows patterns that seem rigid by modern standards, but reflect practical adaptations to the physical demands of medieval life. Men typically handle the heaviest agricultural work, plowing, harvesting grain, and tasks that require upper body strength or extended periods away from the home. Women manage household production, cooking, brewing, textile work, and the care of small children and livestock. But these distinctions are less absolute than they might appear. During harvest time, everyone, regardless of age or gender, participates in bringing in the crops that will determine the family's survival through the coming year. Women often work in the fields alongside men, and men participate in food preparation and childcare when circumstances require it. Survival depends on flexibility and the willingness of all family members to contribute whatever skills and labor they possess. Childhood in the medieval peasant world begins adult responsibilities at ages that would shock modern sensibilities. Children as young as 5 or 6 are expected to contribute to family survival by tending animals, gathering fuel, helping with food preparation, and performing other tasks appropriate to their size and strength. Formal education is not just unavailable, but would be considered a luxury that poor families cannot afford. Yet childhood is not without its pleasures and protections. Children play games that develop skills they'll need as adults while providing entertainment and social bonding. They listen to stories and songs that educate them about their cultural heritage and moral values. They receive affection and care from parents and extended family members who understand that children represent the future of the family line and the community itself. The apprenticeship system provides one of the few opportunities for social mobility available to peasant children. A boy who shows aptitude for craftsmanship might be apprenticed to a miller, blacksmith, or carpenter, learning skills that will provide greater security and status than ordinary agricultural labor. Girls might be placed as servants in wealthier households, where they can learn domestic skills and potentially make advantageous marriage connections. But these opportunities are rare and depend on family connections, available resources, and the specific needs of the community. Most peasant children follow in their parents' footsteps, inheriting not just their social position, but also their specific obligations to the manor and lord. The son of a serf becomes a serf, bound to the same land and subject to the same constraints that governed his father's life. Death is a constant presence in medieval peasant life, far more immediate and visible than in modern society. Infant mortality rates mean that parents expect to lose several children before they reach adulthood. Disease, accident, and malnutrition claim lives with a frequency that would seem shocking to contemporary sensibilities. Yet this familiarity with mortality creates its own forms of wisdom and acceptance. Funeral practices emphasize community support for the grieving family while celebrating the deceased person's contribution to village life. Bodies are prepared for burial by family members and neighbors, with the entire community participating in rituals that honor the dead while comforting the living. The church cemetery becomes a gathering place where generations of village families rest together, creating a physical representation of historical continuity. Grief is acknowledged and supported, but it cannot be allowed to paralyze the survivors. The practical demands of daily life, crops that must be tended, animals that must be fed, children who must be cared for, require that mourning be balanced with continued activity. The community provides help during the immediate crisis, but each family must ultimately find ways to adapt to their losses and continue functioning. The seasonal migration of workers adds another dimension to medieval peasant life. During harvest time, additional laborers might arrive from neighboring regions to help with the intensive work of bringing in crops. These temporary workers bring news from other areas, different perspectives on common problems, and sometimes romantic possibilities for young people whose marriage choices are otherwise limited to local families. Traveling merchants represent another connection to the wider world beyond the immediate village. These traders bring manufactured goods that cannot be produced locally. Metal tools, salt for food preservation, spices and medicines, and luxury items that even poor families might occasionally afford. They also carry news, stories, and information that keeps rural communities connected to regional and national events. But these connections to the outside world are tenuous and irregular. Most peasants live their entire lives within a radius of perhaps 10 or 20 miles from their birthplace. They know their immediate region intimately, but have only vague understanding of distant places and events. The world beyond their personal experience exists mainly in stories and rumors, filtered through multiple retellings that may bear little resemblance to actual facts. This geographical isolation is both limiting and protective. Peasant communities develop strong internal bonds and sophisticated local knowledge, but they remain vulnerable to larger forces beyond their control. Political changes, economic fluctuations, natural disasters, and social movements that can dramatically alter their lives without warning or consultation. The manor system that governs peasant life operates as a complete social and economic unit, designed to be as self-sufficient as possible. The Lord's domain provides grain, livestock, and other agricultural products. Local craftsmen supply tools, clothing, and manufactured goods. The mill grinds grain, the blacksmith shapes metal, and the carpenter builds and repairs wooden structures. Ideally, the manor produces everything its inhabitants need for survival. But this ideal is rarely achieved in practice. Specialization and trade become necessary for items that cannot be produced locally. Iron ore for tools, salt for food preservation, certain types of stone for construction, and luxury goods that justify their cost through improved quality or status. These external dependencies create vulnerabilities that can be exploited by merchants, lords, or political authorities seeking to extract wealth from rural communities. The administration of manor life requires record-keeping and decision-making that affects every peasant family. The steward or bailiff who manages day-to-day operations must balance the lord's demands for income with the peasant's need for survival. He must decide which fields to plant with which crops, how to allocate labor between domain land and peasant holdings, and how to respond to the countless problems that arise in any agricultural community. These administrative decisions are not made in isolation. The manor court provides a forum where peasants can voice their concerns, present grievances, and participate in community problem-solving. While ultimate authority rests with the Lord and his representatives, practical governance requires some degree of consultation with the people who will actually implement whatever policies are decided. The system of common lands provides another arena where individual and community interests must be balanced. Forests, pastures, and other shared resources are managed according to customs that have evolved over generations, specifying who can use what resources when and how. These arrangements prevent overexploitation while ensuring that all community members have access to essential materials. But common land management also creates opportunities for conflict. Population growth can lead to overuse of shared resources. Changes in agricultural practices might require modifications to traditional arrangements. External pressures from lords or neighboring communities can threaten established agreements. Resolving these disputes requires both legal mechanisms and social wisdom that can balance competing claims fairly. The role of women in medieval peasant society extends far beyond the domestic duties that modern stereotypes might suggest. Women participate in agricultural work, contribute to family income through various forms of production, and often manage household resources with considerable independence. They possess specialized knowledge about healthcare, food preparation, textile production, and child rearing that makes them indispensable partners in family survival strategies. Widowhood, while economically challenging, can also provide women with legal and social independence that married women rarely enjoy. A widow might inherit her husband's land holdings, manage her own affairs, and make decisions about remarriage or remaining single based on her own assessment of her situation. These opportunities for female autonomy are limited and precarious, but they do exist within the constraints of medieval social structure. The education of women focuses on practical skills rather than literacy or formal learning, but this shouldn't be interpreted as evidence of intellectual inferiority. Women develop expertise in areas that require considerable knowledge and judgment: herbal medicine, food preservation, household management, and child psychology. They master complex techniques for textile production, brewing, and other forms of domestic manufacturing that contribute significantly to family welfare. Religious life provides additional opportunities for female expression and leadership. Women might achieve recognition as healers, midwives, or spiritual advisors whose wisdom is sought by community members facing difficult decisions. Some women join religious communities that offer alternatives to marriage and motherhood, though these options are primarily available to families wealthy enough to provide the necessary dowries. The relationship between medieval peasants and their natural environment is both intimate and precarious. These people live much closer to natural cycles and processes than modern urban dwellers, understanding weather patterns, seasonal changes, and ecological relationships with a depth born of daily dependence on natural systems. They know which plants are edible, which animals indicate changing weather, and how to work with natural materials in sustainable ways. But this intimacy with nature doesn't translate into environmental protection in the modern sense. Medieval peasants exploit natural resources as intensively as their technology allows, clearing forests for agricultural land, hunting animals for food and materials, and extracting whatever the environment can provide for human use. Their impact is limited more by population size and technological capabilities than by conservation ethics. The gradual degradation of natural resources creates long-term challenges that individual communities struggle to address. Deforestation leads to soil erosion and fuel shortages. Overhunting reduces game populations. Intensive agriculture exhausts soil fertility. These problems develop slowly over generations, making them difficult to recognize and even harder to solve through the collective action of multiple communities. Climate change during the medieval period adds another layer of uncertainty to peasant life. The medieval warm period that characterized earlier centuries begins giving way to cooler, more variable weather patterns that will eventually culminate in the Little Ice Age. These changes affect growing seasons, crop yields, and the viability of settlements in marginal agricultural areas. Peasant communities respond to environmental challenges with the same mixture of innovation and tradition that characterizes other aspects of their lives. They develop new agricultural techniques, modify existing practices, and share information about successful adaptations. But their responses are constrained by limited resources, restricted mobility, and social systems that resist rapid change. The daily routine of medieval peasant life creates its own rhythm of satisfaction and hardship, accomplishment and frustration. Rising before dawn to tend animals, working in fields until the sun sets, spending evenings in productive activities that contribute to family welfare. This schedule provides structure and purpose that many people find fulfilling despite its physical demands. The work itself, while physically demanding, often possesses qualities that modern industrial labor lacks. Peasants can see the direct results of their efforts in growing crops, healthy animals, and improved living conditions. They work outdoors in natural settings that provide sensory richness and variety. They control the pace and methods of their work within the constraints imposed by seasons and weather. Yet this same work can become monotonous, exhausting and frustrating when weather, disease, or other factors beyond human control interfere with carefully planned activities. The anxiety that accompanies agricultural life, wondering whether crops will mature properly, whether livestock will remain healthy, whether stored food will last through winter, creates psychological pressure that affects every aspect of daily experience. The social relationships that sustain peasant communities provide both support and constraint. Neighbors who share resources during times of need also observe and judge each other's behavior with close attention. Extended families that provide security and assistance also limit individual freedom and privacy. Religious communities that offer spiritual comfort also impose moral obligations that may conflict with personal desires. These tensions between individual and community needs require constant negotiation and compromise. Peasant communities develop elaborate systems of reciprocal obligation, shared responsibility, and collective decision-making that allow groups of people to function effectively while maintaining some degree of personal autonomy. These systems represent generations of accumulated wisdom about human cooperation under difficult circumstances. The market towns that serve rural communities provide occasional glimpses of a wider world beyond the immediate village boundaries. Once or twice a year, peasant families might make the journey to the nearest market town, traveling dusty roads on foot or in simple wooden carts. These expeditions represent major events in the peasant calendar, requiring careful planning and the accumulation of whatever surplus goods can be traded for essential items not available locally. Picture yourself walking along these medieval roads, feeling the uneven stones and packed earth beneath your feet. The journey to market might take most of a day, passing through countryside that looks much like your own village. Scattered farmsteads, fields divided into long strips, patches of woodland that provide fuel and building materials for local communities. Other travelers share the road, merchants with pack animals loaded with goods, pilgrims journeying to religious sites, and perhaps occasionally a noble's retinue with their colorful banners and well-fed horses. The market town itself bustles with activity that seems almost overwhelming after the quiet rhythms of village life. Merchants display their wares on wooden tables or directly on the ground, calling out the qualities and prices of their goods in voices that carry over the general din of conversation, animal noises, and commercial activity. The air fills with unfamiliar scents. exotic spices, leather goods, metalwork still warm from the forge, and the mingled aromas of different foods being prepared by various vendors. Here you might trade your family's carefully hoarded surplus, perhaps a few chickens, some eggs, a small quantity of grain or vegetables, for items that cannot be produced in your village, salt for preserving meat through the winter, iron tools that will last longer and work more efficiently than wooden implements, cloth of better quality than your family can weave, or in colors that require dyes not available locally. But let your breathing remain calm and steady as we observe these market interactions. Every transaction requires careful negotiation. Prices are not fixed, and the art of bargaining determines whether your family's limited resources will stretch to cover essential needs. You must evaluate the quality of goods offered, compare prices between different vendors, and make decisions that will affect your family's welfare for months to come. The social aspects of Market Day provide their own rewards. Here you encounter people from other villages, hearing news and gossip from regions beyond your immediate experience. You might learn about crop conditions in neighboring areas, political developments that could affect local communities, or simply enjoy the stimulation of conversation with people who share similar challenges but bring different perspectives to common problems. Young unmarried people find market days particularly exciting, as these gatherings provide rare opportunities to meet potential marriage partners from outside their immediate communities. Parents watch these interactions carefully, evaluating not just the personal qualities of potential suitors, but also their family backgrounds, economic prospects, and the social connections that marriage might create. The return journey home carries a different quality, perhaps satisfaction with successful trades, or worry about decisions that may have been unwise. The familiar landmarks of your own region appear gradually as you retrace your steps, and the sight of your village's church tower or mill wheel brings the comfort of returning to known and safe territory. Religious pilgrimages represent another form of travel that occasionally breaks the routine of peasant life. While most peasants cannot afford the time and expense of journeys to distant holy sites, local pilgrimages to nearby shrines or churches provide opportunities for spiritual renewal and social interaction. These shorter journeys might be undertaken to fulfill religious vows, seek healing for illness, or simply participate in the communal celebration of important religious festivals. The experience of pilgrimage, even on a modest local scale, offers temporary escape from the normal constraints of daily life. Pilgrims travel under the protection of religious authority, which provides some safety from the bandits and political conflicts that make travel dangerous for ordinary people. They meet fellow pilgrims from different social backgrounds, creating temporary communities bound together by shared spiritual purposes rather than the economic and social hierarchies that govern normal life. These religious journeys also provide exposure to different architectural styles, artistic traditions, and cultural practices that expand the pilgrim's understanding of the wider world. A peasant who has spent his entire life among wooden buildings and simple decorations might encounter stone churches with elaborate carvings, painted images, and stained glass windows that reveal new possibilities for human artistic expression. The monastery system creates another point of contact between peasant communities and broader intellectual and spiritual currents. Monasteries serve as centers of learning, medical care, and agricultural innovation that benefit surrounding rural areas. Monks often possess advanced knowledge about farming techniques, animal husbandry, and craftsmanship that they share with local communities through example and direct instruction. Monastic communities also provide social services that secular authorities cannot or will not supply. Monasteries maintain hostels for travelers, hospitals for the sick, and schools for children whose families can afford to support their education. They preserve libraries and scriptoriums where books are copied and preserved, maintaining connections to classical learning and contemporary intellectual developments. The relationship between monasteries and peasant communities involves complex exchanges of goods, services, and obligations. Peasants provide agricultural products and manual labor to monastic communities, while receiving in return access to advanced knowledge, medical care, and spiritual guidance. These relationships are not always harmonious. Disputes can arise over land rights, labor obligations, and the proper balance between monastic and secular authority. Yet the presence of monastic communities provides stability and continuity that purely secular institutions often lack. Monasteries survive political upheavals, economic disruptions, and social changes that destroy other institutions. They maintain traditions of learning and service that bridge different historical periods, preserving knowledge and practices that might otherwise be lost during times of crisis. The guild system, while primarily associated with urban craftsmen, also affects rural communities through its regulation of trade and manufacturing. Guilds control the quality and pricing of manufactured goods, ensuring that peasant consumers receive products that meet established standards while protecting craftsmen from unfair competition. But guild regulations can also limit innovation and increase costs for rural families operating on tight budgets. Peasant communities sometimes develop their own informal associations that serve similar functions to urban guilds. Groups of farmers might cooperate in purchasing expensive equipment like mills or draft animals, sharing costs and benefits according to agreed-upon arrangements. Craft workers in rural areas might coordinate their activities to avoid destructive competition while maintaining quality standards that protect their collective reputation. These rural cooperative arrangements require sophisticated understanding of human psychology and group dynamics. Participants must balance their individual interests with collective welfare, resolve disputes fairly, and adapt their agreements to changing circumstances. The success of such arrangements depends on trust, communication, and shared commitment to common goals, qualities that peasant communities cultivate out of necessity. The legal framework that governs peasant life operates according to principles that blend written law, local custom, and practical necessity. Manor courts handle most disputes that affect rural communities, applying traditional precedents rather than formal legal codes. Justice is administered by people who know the parties involved personally, understanding the family histories and community relationships that provide context for individual conflicts. This personalized approach to justice has both advantages and disadvantages. Judges can consider circumstances and motivations that formal legal systems might ignore, crafting solutions that address underlying problems rather than simply punishing violations. But personal relationships can also introduce bias, favoritism, and conflicts of interest that prevent fair resolution of disputes. The appeal process for peasant legal grievances is limited and expensive, effectively placing final authority in the hands of local officials who may have their own interests in particular outcomes. This creates vulnerability to abuse and corruption, but it also encourages the development of informal mechanisms for conflict resolution that operate outside the formal legal system. Mediation by respected community members, intervention by religious authorities, and various forms of social pressure provide alternatives to formal legal proceedings. These informal approaches often prove more effective than official justice in resolving disputes and maintaining community harmony, though they depend on social cohesion and shared values that may not exist in all circumstances. The economic relationships that connect peasant communities to regional and national markets operate through networks of middlemen, traders, and financial intermediaries who extract profit from rural production while providing access to goods and services that isolated communities cannot supply for themselves. These relationships are often exploitative, with urban merchants and moneylenders taking advantage of peasant ignorance about market conditions and limited bargaining power. Yet these same economic networks also provide opportunities for peasant communities to improve their material conditions through specialization and trade. A village that develops expertise in producing high-quality wool, cheese, or crafted goods can achieve prosperity that would be impossible through subsistence agriculture alone. Success in these specialized markets requires entrepreneurial skills, quality control, and marketing knowledge that challenge traditional assumptions about peasant capabilities. The monetary system that governs commercial transactions remains largely abstract for most peasant families, who conduct most of their economic activities through barter and exchange of goods and services. Money, when it appears in peasant transactions, is often foreign or unfamiliar, requiring trust in merchants and traders who understand its value and authenticity. This limited familiarity with monetary systems creates vulnerability to fraud and manipulation, but it also reflects the reality that most peasant economic activity occurs within local networks where personal relationships and reputation matter more than abstract financial instruments. The transition toward more monetized economic relationships represents a gradual but fundamental change in the nature of rural life. The technological innovations that slowly transform medieval agriculture often originate in peasant communities themselves, developed by farmers and craftsmen who understand local conditions and practical requirements better than distant authorities. Improved plough designs, more efficient harvesting techniques, and better methods of food preservation emerge from centuries of experimentation and adaptation by people whose survival depends on agricultural success. But the spread of technological innovation is slow and uneven, limited by poor communication between communities, resistance to change, and lack of resources for experimentation. A farming technique that proves successful in one region might take generations to reach communities only a few miles away, delayed by geographic barriers, social divisions, and simple ignorance of developments elsewhere. The preservation and transmission of technical knowledge depends primarily on oral tradition and direct demonstration rather than written records. Master craftsmen teach apprentices through hands-on experience, passing along not just specific techniques, but also the accumulated wisdom about when and how to apply different approaches. This system ensures that knowledge is thoroughly understood and adapted to local conditions, but it also makes innovation vulnerable to disruption when skilled practitioners die or leave the community. The gradual accumulation of small improvements in tools, techniques, and procedures creates long-term changes in agricultural productivity and rural living standards that are barely perceptible to individual participants. A peasant family might use essentially the same farming methods as their great-grandparents, while benefiting from dozens of minor modifications that cumulatively improve their efficiency and success. As we draw toward the end of our peaceful journey through medieval peasant life, let your breathing become even deeper and more relaxed. Allow your mind to drift gently over the images and experiences we've shared. The rhythm of agricultural work, the challenges and satisfactions of community life, the constant interplay between human effort and natural forces that shaped every aspect of medieval existence. These people, our ancestors in spirit, if not always in blood, faced hardships that would test the limits of modern endurance. Yet they also experienced forms of community, purpose, and connection to the natural world that our contemporary society often struggles to achieve. Their lives were constrained by social systems that limited individual freedom, but they also possessed kinds of security and belonging that come from deep integration into stable communities. The medieval peasant world reminds us that human happiness and fulfillment can exist under conditions that seem almost impossibly difficult by contemporary standards. These people found meaning in their work, joy in their relationships, and hope for the future despite facing uncertainties and hardships that we can barely imagine. They developed wisdom about cooperation, resilience, and adaptation that remains relevant centuries after their specific circumstances have vanished. Their daily struggles with hunger, disease, and social oppression coexisted with moments of beauty, love, and transcendence that made their lives worth living. They watched sunrises over fields they had planted with their own hands, shared stories and songs that connected them to generations past and future, and created communities that provided support and meaning even in the darkest times. As you prepare to let sleep carry you into peaceful rest, consider the lessons that these medieval lives might offer to our modern world. The importance of community cooperation in facing shared challenges. The satisfaction that comes from meaningful work that produces tangible results. The wisdom of living in harmony with natural cycles and seasonal rhythms. The value of traditions that connect us to our historical roots while providing guidance for contemporary decisions. Let these images and insights settle gently into your consciousness as your body relaxes completely. Feel yourself sinking deeper into the comfort of your modern bed, grateful for the warmth, safety, and abundance that surround you, while carrying with you a new appreciation for the courage and wisdom of those who came before us. The medieval peasant world fades peacefully into the mists of history, leaving you with a sense of connection to the long human story of which you are a part. Close your eyes now, if you haven't already, and allow sleep to come naturally, carrying with it dreams of simpler times and the enduring human capacity to find meaning and beauty even in the most challenging circumstances. Rest now, dear listener, knowing that you are part of an unbroken chain of human experience that stretches back through centuries of struggle and triumph, sorrow and joy. Let sleep enfold you gently, peacefully, as it has countless generations before you, and will countless generations yet to come. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with the quiet wisdom of those who have walked this path before us.